On Bach's Time, His Life in Music. This is week 4 of 6 installments on the life and times of Johann Sebastian Bach, hosted by the Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. We are broadcasting live from the Saskatoon Symphony office. We are on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. Thanks again to Matthew Praxis for handling tech and fielding questions, which I'll answer at the end of the class. Last week, we discussed Bach's first years in Leipzig, where in 1723 he was appointed to the prestigious position as cantor of St. Thomas and director of choir and music in Leipzig. Here, he composed the majority of his cantatas and the major choral works, the Masses, Passions, and the Magnificat. Last week, we honed in on the St. Matthew and St. John Passion. Today, we'll look at Bach's life and musical activities in the scholarly environment of the Leipzig University, as well as his involvement with the Collegium Musicum, a music society in Leipzig that was founded by Georg Philipp Telemann. There's lots to cover: Bach the scholar, Bach the philosopher, the pedagogue, his secular instrumental and choral music, and one of the most important contributions ever to keyboard literature. There's a wealth of instrumental music, concertos, and solo keyboard music composed during this period. With every decade, it seems as though Bach's productivity was going through the roof. The academic environment at St. Thomas School and Leipzig University fostered the integration of his performance and theorist aspirations. Aware of his own scholarly disposition, his love for learning and teaching, one can see how inviting the position as cantor and music director would be to him. The vibrant milieu surely impacted and enriched his extensive musical activities and opened further creative and performance possibilities. Listening to Bach, one can hear the technical sophistication of his craft. How does his music maintain such an appealing sense of balance and symmetry? For Bach, the rationale of being a musician was that the end and ultimate case, as of all music, should be none else but the glory of God and the recreation of the soul mind. This may have been more the frame of mind he had while living in Köthen and Weimar. I think that's when this was said. Because in Leipzig, his stature had to assume the role of musical scholar, and his instruction would need to support the newer teaching methods of logic that were informed by philology and science. The age of humanism and the emerging spirit of the Lutheran Reformation had changed the curriculum at the University of Leipzig to include a more comprehensive approach to the classics, a closer look at the scriptures, and a new respect for science. The curriculum reforms led to a strong interdisciplinary connection among the liberal arts areas, including arithmetic, logic, rhetoric, geometry, astronomy, and grammar. At St. Thomas and similar Latin schools, choir practice, private lessons, singing, and musical performances were central, and so the relationship between music and mathematics formed a link to the contemporary sciences. Like Bach's philosophical colleagues who explored, probed, and who taught the principles of philosophy, it seems Bach created a parallel sphere of inquiry into the principles that govern music, and principles not only of the physical realm, but also of the spiritual and emotional dimension. A student of Bach's, Lorenz Christoph Mitzler, noted that a composer must have sufficient understanding of the tones and of human emotions, a belief possibly adopted from his teacher, Bach. In 1739, the great encyclopedia of knowledge was the Grosses Universal Lexicon by Johann Heinrich Zedler, and in it, the definition of music retains the old cosmological argument for God's existence. The definition is, everything that creates harmony, that is order. And this definition led to an assertion that the whole universe is music. I believe this refers to the ancient concept of musicalis universalis, literally universal music, also called music of the spheres or harmony of the spheres, which considers proportions in the movements of celestial bodies, like the sun, moon, and planets, as a form of music, rock music. Once 17th century scientists discovered that the same laws govern the planets and Earth, the compelling argument arose that the complexity and interconnection of the universe crossed over into music, that there was a similar unifying force in music. So how does this thinking play out, this thinking of the universe play out in Bach's music? Bach wrote a canon, and a canon meaning like a round. We know the song Row, Row, Row Your Boat, and Row, 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 with multiple entries of the melody. And the canon Bach wrote was entitled Trias Harmonica, which translates to the harmonic triad. This canon for 8 voices and 2 choirs conveys Bach's philosophy of music as governed by the principles of counterpoint. In this piece, his counterpoint was designed to show polyphony in its greatest strength and mastering the most hidden secrets of harmony. And I'm quoting from his obituary that his son wrote. This little yet mighty canon demonstrates a triad as part of a result of horizontal lines, creating counterpoint, that also govern rhythmic structure. So I'll just play a triad first. And that's sort of the horizontal layout. And then we also hear how it is vertically stacked. And so a triad is often referred to as vertically organized intervals. Yet we hear how within the rules of counterpoint and the principles adhered to by Bach in the canon, he reveals how the rules intrinsically regulate the vertical and horizontal organization of the polyphony. Since the canon melody has constant notes placed on strong beats within the stream of 8th note beats, we hear the triads popping out of the texture on the quarter note beats. And the passing notes remain on the weak beats. So the line of the canon goes as such. And so we can hear the outline of the triad there in that line. And the counterpoint then will define not just vertical aspects of the sound, but the time and horizontal pacing as well. And then we'll see how this defines space. There's a 2-dimensional space of one choir and the 3-dimensional space created by the second choir. It's the double choir feature presenting distinct musical material. Plus the canon, and we'll listen to this very shortly, features regressive time in that it can be played backwards. So even as I played, it is like a musical palindrome. It can be read forward or backwards, or a musical Rorschach. And so there we'll see how the canon illuminates the malleable harmonic triad in normal, inverted, forward, and retrograde motion. And so here's a great video with visual of how this canon is constructed. Here's Bach's genius rather clearly He's subjected the complex interrelationship of the concepts of time and space into a treatment which brilliantly captures both phenomena in a single musical event. According to Christian Wolff, author of the wonderful book Bach, the Learned Musician, this canon unifies knowledge by way of a profound lesson in music theory, philosophy, and theology. Space and time were main philosophical themes of the late 17th and early 18th centuries, and this canon plays as though mirroring the well-ordered universe. Bach did not pursue abstract goals. He sought insight into the depths of the wisdom of the world. This is according to a statement made on Bach's behalf. Considering Bach's environment in Leipzig, this wisdom of the world may reflect the metaphysical dimension in his musical thinking. I like this summation by Christian Wolff again. He notes how this approach provides the key to understanding his never-ending musical empiricism, which deliberately tied theoretical knowledge to practical experience. Most notably, Bach's compositions, as the exceedingly careful musical elaborations that they are, may epitomize nothing less than the difficult task of finding for himself an argument for the existence of God, perhaps the ultimate goal of his musical science. So let's return to earth, to Leipzig University. The university church was St. Paul's Church, which doubled as the university's main auditorium. Bach certainly performed and participated in many functions there. Bach was specifically called for to be involved in many prominent events. For one such event, he was commissioned to provide music for the official reception of the royal family from Dresden. For this occasion, the university rector had resolved to 1. Order a cantata, 2. The same cantata be composed by Mr. Bach, and 3. The latter, Mr. Bach, to be entrusted with the direction of the music. Evidently, there was a preference for Bach in regards to academic leadership for illustrious events. He was also commissioned to write music for a memorial for the deceased Saxon electress and Queen of Poland, Christiane Eberharin. This secular cantata was called Lass Fürsten, lass noch einen Strahl. Let, Princess, let still one more glance, and is also known as Trauraude. There exists a description of that funeral service for the Queen, which refers to an organ prelude and postlude that we can surmise, given the significance of the event, only Bach would have played. One can speculate that a suitable piece for this event would have been the prelude and fugue in B minor, BWV 544, and being in B minor would conveniently drown out the instrumental ensemble tuning for the Trauraude cantata, which is also in B minor. Unfortunately, Bach's performance activities, such as organ performances and recitals, were not adequately recorded. Reports are limited to organ exams or concerts out of town. However, it would be odd for this world-famous organist, as is the heading of his obituary, for him that this designation and recognition was not based on him playing in Leipzig during the last decades of his life. So let's listen to the organ work that may have been played while the ensemble was tuning up for the next piece. Here is Till Lindert performing Bach's Prelude and Fugue in B minor. The Trauraude cantata would then follow this work. And the text for the cantata was written by Johann Christoph Gottsched, a professor of philosophy and poetry. It was first performed in 1727 and for this event, and Bach himself directed from the harpsichord. The Trauraude is undoubtedly one of Bach's most moving compositions. It confirms the esteem in which the deceased electress was held. From start to finish, the work is characterized by an ardor evoked by the rich orchestration, which includes 2 oboes d'amore, 2 gambas, and 2 lutes. The conductor Václav Lux of the Netherlands Bach Society says, "The music is charged with intimacy, with an extremely personal feel, as if a family member has died." Let's listen to the first recitative of this cantata, called Dein Sachsen, dein bestürzte Meissen, which translates to Your Saxony, your distraught Meissen. Meissen is incidentally a town in Saxony. Here it is performed by the Netherlands Bach Society.
Dein Sachsen, dein bestürztes Meissen, erstarrt bei deiner Königsgruft. Das Auge tränt, die Zunge ruft, mein Schmerz kann unbeschreiblich heißen. Er klagt August und Prinz und Land. Der Ahne ächzt, der Bürger trauert. Wie hat dich nicht das Volk bedauert?
Very stirring music. You just hear the pathos. So going back to St. Paul's Church, one of the perks of Bach's position and association with the university was that the church housed an incredible new organ. It had 53 stops, 3 manuals, and pedal. And at the time, it was one of the grandest and finest organs in Germany, and available to Bach. In his life for the first time, the organ was one that he could not find enough praise and load, especially for its rare stops, which were newly made and could not be found in many organs. So we can easily imagine that he used that organ whenever possible, for teaching, for practicing, and all performances possible. Organ works such as the Prelude and Fugue in B minor, BWV 544 that we just heard, and the Prelude and Fugue in E minor, BWV 548, took the genre to a whole new level. Yep, beyond the well-tempered clavier. And they demonstrate Bach's command and sustain in great length. The Prelude is over 137 measures and the Fugue more than 231. Plus, they maintain an equilibrium of improvisatory and constructive elements. And both the Prelude and Fugue integrate a concerto-like design within their innovative large-scale design. The ideal venue for Bach's virtuoso organist art was then surely St. Paul's, and he was a main attraction there for during the regular trade fairs in town when Leipzig musicians, actors, dancers, and all forms of performing artists would be showcased. We can glean what a typical recital in Leipzig might be like by looking at his out-of-town programs. Here is an excerpt reported from a Dresden newspaper in 1725. When the Kapelle director from Leipzig, Mr. Bach, came here recently, he was very well received by the local virtuosos at the court and in the city, since he is greatly admired by all of them for his musical adroitness and art. Yesterday and the day before, in the presence of the same, he performed for over an hour on the new organ in St. Sophia's Church, preludes and various concertos with intervening soft instrumental music in all keys. In the university milieu, one can see that Bach was at home with the academic luminaries of the school, with the creators of new knowledge. From the beginning of his cantorship, Bach fostered relationships with the city's political, commercial, and clerical establishment, as well as the intellectual elite. We may remember he himself had had no formal university degree. He lacked the credentials or the qualifications required for academia. The university was attractive to him intellectually, and as we learn, he delivered beyond expectation. He took up the gauntlet with daring musical endeavors there. We can see somewhat to the extent to which Bach moved in the academic atmosphere, by that at least 6 of his professorial colleagues were godparents to his children. Other social connections are documented, including a judge of the Superior Court who served, again, as godfather to 2 children, an affluent and influential merchant in town, a music lover, and their next-door neighbor on St. Thomas Square. Bach's audience and social circle likely exerted considerable influence on the direction and shape of his musical goals, his conduct in office, and in his conceptualization of his compositions. Many of Bach's listeners appreciated his beautiful music and were moved by the artful and impassioned performances, yet few understood the internal structure and the intricate inner workings. Many of the musicians, performers, were keen to learn more, and these musically accomplished St. Thomas alumni or top town musicians and students were mostly studying law, philosophy, and theology while aspiring to careers as cantors and court musicians. These were musicians Bach could rely on. Many were taking private lessons with him, perhaps in exchange for participating in regular cantata performances. Bach advocated for them and wanted their time rewarded with a stipend. So he fought hard with the city council to find supplementary sources to compensate them. Over the years in Leipzig, there were at least 60 such senior gifted students whom Bach taught private lessons. He generally emphasized the practical part of music, steering away from dry writing exercises, and trained his pupils directly on the basis of keyboard practice. He also set his students to conceptualizing choral harmonization in order to understand the interplay of polyphonic, which is at least 2 voices. He brought up his students on his own works, being the most instructive pieces for the clavier at the time. They also copied out his chorale settings from his cantatas and oratorios. Again, this affirms the central pedagogical role assigned in the writing of these chorales. It's hard not to take a step back here to behold how far-reaching these works of one composer are. What he offered his students, their students, and their students, the listener, the scholar, the performer, the musician, and more, from then to today. While Bach's students did not achieve Bach's mastery in composition or performance, they certainly play a decisive role in preserving and disseminating his music. Let's move to the years 1729 and 30, which brought about a series of changes for Bach. In March 1729, he assumed the directorship of the most prestigious musical society in Leipzig, the Collegium Musica, which entailed really a broadened scope of his musical activities. The Collegium directorship was a great commitment for Bach. He was responsible, on top of his regular church duties, for preparing and carrying out weekly series of performances over the year. This schedule was even more demanding by the additional activities of the 3 times a year trade fairs, and he would stay on as director for more than 8 years. Relevant documentation of these Collegium performances and programs are rare to find, but some compositions traced to these programs include works by Johann Bernhard Bach, George Friedrich Handel, Pietro Locatelli, Nicola Porpora and Alessandro Scarlatti. Here's the little handle that was, or let's listen to a little handle that was likely heard from the opening of the cantata Armida Abbandonata, Armida Abandoned. This is the recitative Dietro l'orme fugaci, meaning behind the fleeting footsteps, here performed by the mezzo-soprano Janet Baker with the English Chamber Orchestra. Wonderful and dramatic. There are accounts that Italian solo cantatas and new kinds of music, such as by Nicola Porpora and quartets by Telemann, were introduced in Leipzig. Let's hear again some of this new music. Here's the secular cantata La Gelosia by Porpora, the Jealousy, that would have been performed by the Collegium. This is the aria Giura il nocche che al mare, meaning the helmsman swears, performed by the Concerto Malante and featuring countertenor Philippe Jarouski. This cantata sounds like so much fun. I'm looking forward to hearing the whole thing at some point. I hadn't heard of Nicola Porpora very much prior. So another work that was particularly suitable for the Collegium weekly performances was Bach's own Coffee Cantata, which you may have heard of. And this cantata takes a humorous tone with caffeine addiction. And another comical work would be his dramatic cantata Geschwinde, ihr Geschwinde, ich verbinde Winde. Let me try that again. Geschwinde, ihr verbinden Winde. The contest between Phoebus and Pan. This cantata may have really piqued people's interest, as the cantata takes the form of a singing contest and addresses aesthetic criteria for high and low styles of music. And within this frame, Bach presented his own preferences for the sophisticated and learned style, the high art, versus the superficial and trivial effects of popular musical fashions. In this work, however, Bach ingeniously embraces pop culture and wins the listener with humor and comical musical effects. Let's listen to the soloists of the Stuttgarten Kantorei and the Schiffsbarock Stuttgart Ensemble.
Tanze zu Sprunge, so wache das Herz. Tanze zu Sprünge, so wackelt das Herz, zu Tanze, zu Sprünge, zu Tanze, zu Sprünge, zu Sprünge, zu Tanze, so wackelt das Herz, zu Tanze, zu Sprünge, zu Tanze, zu Sprünge, so wackelt das Herz, zu Tanze, zu Sprünge, so wackelt das Herz.
Ha, ha, ha. This music is so light, bright, and airy, and reminds me a little of Mozart's vocal works. Let's move on to some keyboard works now of this period. It's safe to say that much of Bach's keyboard pieces from his time at the Collegium were presented at the weekly concerts. This keyboard music included the Clavier Oubong series and the Well-Tempered Clavier Part 2. There would have also been a core repertoire of chamber music including sonatas for violin, flute, or viola da gamba with basso continuo. We don't know that these are all specifically composed for the Collegium, as some may have been commissions or for another purpose. The instrumental works presented at the Collegium were the orchestral suites and concertos for harpsichord, for 1 harpsichord, 2, 3, and even 4 harpsichords. Wowza. And so some of these are also Bach's arrangements of various Vivaldi concertos for organ and harpsichord. So let's hear a bit of that quartet of harpsichords. Up next is a concerto in A minor, which is largely based on Vivaldi's concerto in B minor for 4 violins and orchestra. That the 4 violin soloists become harpsichordists is an exciting twist, and the A minor is swapped in for B minor. Here's the concerto performed by the Netherlands Bach Society. I think the 4 harpsichords have a great blend of sound. And so with these concertos for 1, 2, 3, 4 harpsichords, Bach set new standards and created a new dynamism in the interplay between the keyboard soloist or soloists and the instrumental ensemble. He established a new genre which further consolidated by his sons would become, by the end of the 18th century, the favored concerto type. Throughout the 1730s, the Collegium Musicum was at the center of Bach's weekly activities. It both fostered the development of his sacred and secular works and propelled him to compose and perform keyboard music. Mounting the first performances of concertos for solo harpsichord and orchestra, as opposed to a concertino, such one we heard was the Brandenburg Fifth Concerto, where the violin, flute, and harpsichord were all soloists. This solo concerto was groundbreaking. Bach was at the fore of a new genre that within the next 50 years would transform the European public concert life, paving the way for more composer virtuosos like Mozart and Bach, down the road Brahms, Liszt, and Rachmaninoff. That Bach's sons and students contributed to the genre by composing and putting their concertos in print. This also helped compound the impact of the keyboard concerto genre. Only but a fraction of his keyboard output The keyboard concertos show how he kept pace with the luminaries on the European stage, such as Domenico Scarlatti in Italy, François Couperin and Jean-Philippe Rameau in France, and Handel in England. How Bach juggled management of the music scene in Leipzig, the advancement of piano technique, and the continuing refinement of his art is a wonder. Bach's reputation as a virtuoso prevailed throughout his career and for decades after, and he was certainly aware of what piano styles were in vogue around Europe. In his Fantasia and Fugue in C minor, BWV 906, we can hear his esteem for the Scarlattian style. Let's listen to this Fantasia and Fugue, some of Bach's most daring and chromatic counterpoint writing, here played by Canada's own Glenn Gould. I've actually added this to my to learn in the future list or to program on a recital. It's so delightful. And in case you missed it earlier, this was also the opening music of the class, this Fantasy and Fugue in C minor. In Leipzig, Bach decided to add a second volume to the Well-Tempered Clavier, which was the collection of 24 preludes and fugues in each tonality, the first volume of which was written in Köthen. And here we get even more of an idea in the second volume of the evolutionary turn his works are taking. The most original source of the Well-Tempered Clavier, Volume 2, is dated to 1738 to 1742, and consists also of some reworkings and transpositions of earlier preludes and fugues. Here, Bach was renewing his interest and attention as a keyboard virtuoso with these keyboard projects, leading to the compilation and self-publishing of one of his most important projects, titled the Clavier Ubang series. In the title Clavier Ubang, clavier is the generic term covering all keyed instruments, including organ, and Ubang means exercise or practice. The collection consists of a comprehensive keyboard practice in 4-part writing. The 4 parts, or volumes, to the Clavier Ubang serve as a complete approach to the art of keyboard music, according to Bach. First, there was music for the most important keyboard instruments, 1 and 2 manual harpsichords, various sized organs, in all the standard forms, genres, and categories, including suite, concerto, variations, and more. All fundamental composition methods are included as well, all keys used, and it featured the advanced challenges of keyboard playing, pieces with hand crossing, and complex double pedaling technique. Bach's Opus 1 would be a collection of 6 partitas appearing in 1731 under the title Clavier Ubang. And as the publisher, Bach took the financial risk and invested gradually into the project's next 5 installments. He recruited 6 colleagues in select cities to serve as sales agents working on commission. These cities included many organists organists or chamber musicians, the agents in the following cities: Dresden, Halle, Lüneburg, Brunswick, Nuremberg, and Augsburg. Bach henceforth tested the market and upon determining that the individual partitas sold well, arranged a reprinting of all 6 in a single volume. And henceforth, the full title of the Klavierübung Part 1 was Preludes, Allemands, Courant, Sarabande, Gigue, Minuet, and other gallantries. And these were the names of the movements in the partitas, the 6 partitas. Let's hear a delightful movement, one of my favorites. This is the Capriccio from Bach's second partita, played by Richard Good. I really love this recording. Heard it a million times, I'm sure. And there's such a clear sense of arrivals in the phrases, and you hear all the individual lines, the delineation between the bass, the top, and it's just fabulous. The partitas in part 1 of the Klavierübung were followed in the spring of 1735 with the Italian Concerto and French Overture in the second part of the Klavierübung. The full title of Part 2 is A Concerto After the Italian Taste and an Overture After the French Manner. In composing a solo concerto in Italian style, Bach had the twofold task of simulating the sound of a concerto grosso, or tutti, the full orchestra, and concertino, the soloist or group of soloists, and setting the fast, slow, fast form with the exuberant spirit of the Italian concerto grosso models. Even one of the severest critics of Bach, Johann Scheibe, openly admired the composer's resolution of the solo concerto problems. His review in 1739 says, "Finally, I must mention that concertos are also written for one instrument alone. There are some quite good concertos of this kind, particularly for clavier. But preeminent is a clavier concerto of which the author is the famous Bach in Leipzig. Who is there who will not admit at once that this clavier concerto is to be regarded as a perfect model of a well-designed solo concerto? It would take as great a master of music as Mr. Bach to provide us with such a piece, which deserves emulation by all our great composers, and which will be imitated all in vain by foreigners." The first movement of the Italian concerto opens with the tutti orchestra leading the proceedings and stating the theme. This vigorous, extroverted material is evocative of the full forces of a string orchestra. Bach ends that first section with a strong, no-nonsense cadence. I can hear the exclamation points, and after this, leading to the solo theme, the soloist. And just ended that. And so it's an expressive idea at first, quite simple, then it becomes increasingly more decorative. Here, this more decorative here. After. And the back and forth that ensues between the tutti and the concertino strikes at the heart of the concerto grosso principle. And rarely found in Bach's scores, the Italian concerto also has many dynamic markings for softs and louds, which also underlines his concerto grosso intentions. Capturing the exuberant spirit of the Italian models, the outer movements of this concerto offer good humor and a vital momentum, while the slow movement is a solo aria and ethereal outpouring that defies explanation. Here is some of the Italian concerto eloquently played by Sir Andras Schiff. This recording is also great because it offers the piano score to follow along with. Great. I highly recommend hearing that entire concerto, especially the ethereal and otherworldly second movement. So the third part of the Klavierübung is connected to Bach's growing interest in old techniques of the motet style and ancient church modality, and just another sphere for him to broaden the stylistic spectrum. These resulted in the chorale preludes for organ. This Übung is entitled Various Preludes on the Catechism and Other Hymns. The concluding part 4 of the Klavierübung was published in the fall of 1741 with the title Aria with Diverse Variations, what we now refer to as the Goldberg Variations. We'll get more into those next week, so tune in. The overall circulation of the Klavierübung must have been considerable, as the single print runs were of at least 100 copies. Part 1 may have had 3 printings, and these were all engraved. And so this kaleidoscope of published keyboard music remains a living memory of Bach, and in his son's word, in the obituary, of the greatest organ and clavier player that we have ever had. There's a chapter in Forkel's biography of Bach about him as a reviser of his own works, and how he employed to make little by little the faulty good, the good better, and the better perfect. With the help of Bach's sons likely, he clearly recognized a significant characteristic of Bach's compositional activities: the perpetual process of reviewing, revising, and improving his scores. Forkel noted, even commonplace passages are frequently changed into the most elegant by changing, taking away, or adding a single note. Bach regularly turned to his works, like the Well-Tempered Clavier, to sharpen his compositional processing. This is reflected in his ongoing revisions, a steady flow of changes, major and minor adjustments he made either in the autograph score or in his students' copies. It may be surprising to learn that Bach ordinarily composed away from the keyboard. He would later try the music out on a keyboard, but the essential work took place in his studio at his desk. He avoided pre-ruled paper so he could structurally plan a layout of the piece first. In this way, he also saved on more expensive music paper that was heavier for printing purposes and that would have had to stay on to a music stand without blowing away, I guess. And returning to the topic of his endless revisions, it is probably the combination of these external influences, this constant refinement, compounded by his continuous and rigorous teaching activities at the university, that raised the level of Bach's art. Beyond more conventional processes of arranging music from instrument to another medium, Bach's rewriting of his own music also resulted in a complete overhaul or transformation of the original. And one great example of this is the Symphonia Cantata BWV 29. And the work is based on the opening preludio of Partita number 3 in E major for unaccompanied solo violin. The opening of which goes like. So that may sound familiar. And here, this was transformed into a cantata version. I, very long time ago, played this preludio and had no idea this cantata existed, but it really opens one's ears to hear it more fleshed out in a way with the brass and full orchestra. So this cantata is a totally new rendering of the piece initially conceived for just a single staff for violin and now scored for a 10-part ensemble piece. Bach also had the novel idea of adding the obbligato organ, and in hearing that active organ part, this cantata Sinfonia makes sense in the bigger picture as well of his keyboard concerto compositions flourishing in those years, the 1730s. So I think with the time we have left, I will move to any questions there may be. Opening my chat. I had a question myself for any participants who wish to share. I was wondering if there were any works on the playlists that works or performers you particularly enjoyed. It seems as though it was good to hear about the influence of other composers on Bach, such as Vivaldi. And then Susan writes she enjoyed hearing the solo soprano or tenors with orchestral works. Yeah, I think those are mostly listened to cantatas, and of course the Passions, and it's just glorious music. I've always heard people say Bach's music is maybe the choral music is his best, and I've really focused on the keyboard music, or listened more to the solo unaccompanied suites for violin and for cello. And so there's a question here. Would I know when Bach switched from writing in tablature to notation on the standard musical staff? That's a great question. And I think, I'm guessing since in my reading that came up during his period in Weimar, I believe, Weimar or maybe Köthen, I would imagine by the time he was in Leipzig, he was writing on the standard musical notation. But I'm sure with a little research, I could probably find a more specific answer for that. Mm. I would wager that it was written in the standard musical notation, being written in the last decades of his life. So I'm pretty sure it would have been, but I will confirm that. If I'm wrong, I will bring that up next week for sure. And speaking of next week, that is a class I'm really looking forward to. It's titled Keyboard Wizardry, and so we will cover more of his keyboard works, the Goldberg variations, and it will be, I'm really looking forward to that. Let's see. And then I have another question here. If I could share more about the various monetary hardships that Bach seems to have endured in Leipzig. So I believe what was agreed upon in his contract, they did not meet their end of the agreement, and so he was not paid as much. And as he was told, and I think that was a big part of it, that what was originally in the contract. And also, I think it was difficult to get enough funds to pay his musicians, and he really wanted their hard work rewarded well. Oh, not a question, but a thank you. Thank you, Tonya, for your kind words. Well, since we're at since we're at the hour and there aren't any more questions at this point, or if you have more, I will be happy to answer them next week. I guess we'll wrap it today, and I will look forward to next week and keyboard wizardry. Thank you, and have a great week.